Now, let's clarify, you actually don't need a buyer's agent to buy a house, and actually, a seller doesn't even need a listing agent to sell a house. So why would you still want to use a buyer's agent? And if anything, like, why not just go with the seller's agent? And by the way, you also don't need a general contractor to build your house, nor an architect to draw architectural plans, nor an attorney to represent you in court. But anyway, first let's talk the different types of agent representations in California. So you got the agent that represents the buyer, and then there's the agent that represents the seller, and then there's the situation where one agent represents both the buyer and the seller in a situation that is called dual agency. Now, historically among buyers, there was like this big confusion as to who was representing who. Buyers thought they were being represented by an agent when in fact, the agent was representing the seller. So like after a bunch of lawsuits around the 1980s, California required agents to confirm and disclose the type of agencies. Now, if we look at this California required agency disclosure, the role of the seller's agent is they have a fiduciary duty, which we'll talk about later, of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty to the seller. So like, what the heck is a fiduciary? A fiduciary is pretty much someone who represents someone else, typically in matters of money or property, and is legally required to act in that person's best interest and ahead of their own interest. So a real estate agent can be a fiduciary, an attorney can be a fiduciary, a car salesperson, not a fiduciary. And interestingly, not all financial advisors are fiduciaries. So if you, the buyer, go to the seller's agent unrepresented, they have no fiduciary duty to you, or essentially they have no legal obligation to look after your best interest. Now, in California, with the consent of both parties, the seller's or the buyer's agent can become a dual agent or a fiduciary to both parties, at which point she would essentially have to negotiate in the interest of both parties who are negotiating against each other, while at the same time being confidential and loyal to both, which is pretty much like having one attorney represent the plaintiff and the defendant at the same time. Or like telling your wife that you got a girlfriend, but not to worry, you're gonna be loyal to both of them. Now, pretty much for the same reason that your wife just left you, many states have already banned dual agency, including Florida, Colorado, and Texas. Yes, that's right, Texas, the state that pretty much legalized walking around with a shotgun, has illegalized dual agency. And while technically it's still legal in California, I personally have a policy against it. One is just way too much liability, more likely to lead to a lawsuit, and two, I just don't believe it's in my client's interest. I mean, as a seller's agent, if the home inspector says like he couldn't complete the camera inspection on the main sewer line because of a clog, I want to advise the seller to try to settle the issue by offering like a $500 credit to the buyer. Now, if I'm representing the buyer, I want to make them aware that that's an old sewer line. It's next to a massive tree and it may require hydrojetting to clean the line. And once it's cleaned, root intrusions and cracks that were previously not visible may be revealed, which could lead to replacing the drain line at a cost of anywhere between $8,000 and $20,000. So seller, either hydrojet the drain line so we can do a proper inspection, or we settle the issue for $13,000. So as you can see, there's already a huge conflict of interest between what's best for the buyer and what's best for the seller. So yes, one reason to get a buyer's agent is so you have exclusive representation by someone who owes you a fiduciary duty or has a legal obligation to look after your interest alone and not the sellers. And by the way, my name is Daniel Rangel, real estate agent in Los Angeles. If I can be of any help, it would be an honor. And for a free consultation on buying or selling, you can find my information in the description below. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit like or subscribe button. Now, to all of this, you may still be like, what? Fiduciary duty for what? Like, I got Zillow and Redfin. I don't need some TikToker to open the door for me, pressuring me to buy this house I can't even afford. And to that I say, you're 100% right. If all your agent is doing is like opening doors, talking about that's a kitchen, that's a bathroom, that's a bedroom, I think, and then they're just making like cool dancing videos on TikTok, yeah, that's not good. You want someone who's less of a salesperson and more of a consultant. And one of the biggest values of a good buyer's agent isn't necessarily to just like help you identify a house, but rather to guide you through the investigative, administrative, and financial process of buying a house. For example, on the administrative side, keep in mind that unlike many other parts of the world where the real estate agent only prepares an offer, then an attorney writes the actual purchase contract, in California, the buyer's agent prepares the actual purchase contract. Now let me clarify, they don't write like the whole actual contract, but they do set some of the most important terms of that contract, which you are then legally bound to. And to highlight the importance of this, in 2007, there was a case where an agent didn't check off one tiny little box on the purchase contract. That tiny little box would have given the buyer the right to cancel the transaction if they couldn't secure financing. Now, unfortunately for the buyer, the Great Recession hit during escrow and she wasn't able to get financing. The property was put back on the market and eventually sold for half the price. The seller sued the buyer for damages over $300,000 and won, all because the agent lacked the administrative skills and didn't check off one tiny little box. Now, unfortunately, I'm way too familiar with this case because the client to that agent was my mom. So yes, choose your agent wisely. Now, on the investigative side, I represented a client to buy a house during COVID. Now, the property was being sold with a tenant. Both the seller and the seller's agent told us and put it in writing that the tenant was paying rent, but something just didn't feel right. So I accidentally ran into the tenant and he's like, what? I haven't been paying rent for like 3 months and I have tenant COVID protections. And once that's over, eviction court's gonna take minimum like 6 months. And once that's over, then I'll just file for bankruptcy. Wow, so yeah, we immediately canceled the transaction. But to make things even worse, the seller insisted that he was entitled to the buyer's $50,000 deposit and didn't want to sign off on the release. Now, fortunately, the contract terms we negotiated protected the buyer and he eventually got his deposit back. So yes, a good buyer's agent can even help you cancel a transaction and get your deposit back. Now, for one example on the financial value of a buyer's agent, a client came to me already pre-approved. They were like, it's a 6% interest rate. We think it's pretty good, which in fact, at the time, it was good. But after talking to the lender and reviewing the loan estimate, turns out, yes, they were getting a good rate, but they were also paying close to $30,000 in what is called discount points, or essentially money paid up front to reduce the interest rate. So we shopped around. Not only did we get a better interest rate, but also avoided paying $30,000 in extra fees. The thing is, there's so many other terms to a mortgage, and a good interest rate doesn't necessarily mean a good mortgage. So yes, a good buyer's agent can help you make sense of some of these different terms. Now, when I work with buyers, I personally have an over 50-point checklist that I've created over time of things to watch out for and procedures to follow. And this includes stuff like, does the property have any pending violations with the city? Are there any deed restrictions? Am I getting the square footage that I'm paying for? Also, talking to the neighbors during the inspection period to see if there's any property line disputes or just like juicy information that would affect my client's decision to buy. So yes, there's a bunch more to buying a house than just like pretty pictures on Zillow and a realtor to open the door for you. And if you want fiduciary representation by someone who is legally required to look after your interest and your interest alone, and who's going to guide you through the administrative, investigative, and financial process of buying a house, then yes, get a buyer's agent. But also keep in mind, not all agents are created equally. So if your realtor is only like opening doors and making like cool dancing videos on TikTok, yeah, you probably want to think about that. Now, fortunately, my experience is there is still a bunch of really good agents out there. I mean, sometimes I'm like, wow, you're like a really good agent. I kind of want to refer my clients to you. And by the way, my name is Daniel Rangel, real estate agent in Los Angeles. If I can be of any help, it would be an honor. And for a free consultation on buying or selling, you can find my information in the description below. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit like or subscribe. But either way, thanks a bunch for watching and have an awesome day. Also, big fat disclaimer, this is not legal advice. I am not an attorney, and for the sake of liability, this is just for entertainment purposes only.